Hi, my name is Liz Hiller with NACE, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Trend Watch, New Data on the Gen Z Recruitment Landscape. We encourage you to actively participate in the chat and please post questions in the Q&A. It is my pleasure to introduce Kate Beckman, Director of Community and Insights for RippleMatch. Take it away, Kate.
Hi, everyone. So excited to be here today to talk about this topic, which is exploring new data on Gen Z and the recruitment landscape and the trends that we're seeing. I'm really excited to see so many folks signing in. I know we had a lot of interest in this presentation. So again, feel free to say hello in the chat. I personally love for webinars to feel a bit more interactive. So if you want to just introduce yourself in the chat so I can get a sense of who's all in the room today, would love to know where you're calling in from, your role, or if you're from career services. It's always just great to get a conversation going. To introduce myself, my name is Kate Beckman. I'm the Director of Community and Insights at RippleMatch. I'll share a bit more about RippleMatch on the next slide, but I run Community Insights at Brand at RippleMatch. So I foster all of our educational programming. I conduct our research on Gen Z talent trends. I also recently launched a newsletter about those Gen Z talent trends. I just popped that in the chat. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, would be happy to either connect with you or have you follow along with the newsletter for more data insights. But really excited to be here today. It's great to see so many folks on the call from all across the country. I'm calling in from Brooklyn, New York today, so fun to see if there's any other fellow East Coast folks, but also cool to see so many from all over. Moving on to a bit more about what RippleMatch does. So RippleMatch, what we do is we help our partners hire the best early career talent more efficiently than ever before. So we're actually the only AI-powered early career recruitment platform. We help our partners reach the right talent, increase efficiency, and improve diversity. And the way that we do that is we use AI to find the best candidates in your applicant pool and our talent network. So we automate resume review, we automate sourcing, essentially the inbound and outbound functions of that. And from this, you're able to actually find the best talent from your various sourcing channels, your job boards, your campus visits, and of course, the RippleMatch network to find the very best talent and fit for your roles. One thing that I wanted to point out, because we have an exciting content opportunity coming up. I know we have a lot of customers on the call today. A lot of folks are involved with NACE that also happen to be RippleMatch customers. So I wanted to share a really exciting initiative that we're doing, which is the Summer Learning Series. It's a collaborative academy designed for campus recruitment teams. So this is going to be knowledge exchange, so group discussions, community workshops, expert panels, some data webinars, really to just explore all of the things that go into planning for another fall season. So if you want to learn more about that, I did pop that in the chat since I know we do have a number of customers on the team. If you're not a customer, feel free to click the link and learn more as well. But I just wanted to share that this is something we're going to be doing this summer that we're really excited for, to really make the most of planning, make the most of course, all the insights that are coming out of the Gen Z workforce. But on that note, let's dive into the presentation because we have a ton to cover today. I do want to point out there's going to be a lot of data, and at the end of the presentation, I will share a link and a QR code so you can actually download the full report of this. We have published a report of this that's expanded beyond just the slides, so I'll share that at the end of the presentation as I'm answering questions during the Q&A. But in terms of what we're going to be talking about today, there's 4 key areas that are really trends we're going to be talking about when it comes to the Gen Z recruitment landscape. The first one is Gen Z confidence. So we'll share some data over time about how confidence has transformed, changed over time within Gen Z candidates. We'll look at some job search trends specifically in terms of the applications candidates are submitting, how they're using AI. We're going to dive into candidate experience and reneg. So what are the rates that candidates are rescinding their offers currently? And then we'll focus on Gen Z retention, since that, of course, is a very important part of recruitment, is how do you retain those candidates? We'll share a bit about what candidates are looking for when it comes to career progression, competitive compensation, and whatnot. So before we dive into that, just want to share a bit of context about the data here. We collected this pretty recently. So mid-January is when we conducted the survey, and then we obviously analyzed and spliced all the data. Pretty split on gender, a little more STEM heavy, but we do look at some stats between non-STEM candidates and STEM candidates to see if there's any differences, and pretty distributed beyond academic years as well. I do want to say as we go throughout the presentation, I think it's great for folks to share any reactions or insights to the data. Again, what fun is having a webinar if we can't all kind of participate in the conversations. I really encourage you, if you find any of these stats interesting, feel free to write in the chat and share, anything you've noticed in the landscape, anything that rings true when you're hearing these stats. If you have specific questions that you want me to tackle near the end of the Q&A, please put those in the Q&A box. I do try to keep an eye on the chat during the session, but as it's constantly flowing, it can be hard to bookmark those questions. So if you have specific questions you want me to answer, put those in the Q&A chat box. But for just general commentary, your own experiences that you've been seeing with this data, I really encourage you to write in the chat. I think it's great to have this be as more of a collaborative conversation since we have so many great folks in the room. But let's start with confidence in today's job search. So this data we've been collecting over time. So again, as my position of Director of Community Insights, I've been serving these Gen Z candidates actually for close to 5 years now. And so we have data at different intervals that really shows us how the Gen Z confidence has changed as the economic landscape has changed. So this particular question, as you search for jobs or internships, how are you feeling about securing a position based on the current job market and the economy? As you can see here, you might recall spring 2022, the market was really great. The economic landscape felt really strong. Candidates had a ton of great prospects going into their full-time, job search, or of course that internship. But of course, as we remember, fall 2022, the economic landscape started to falter. We saw a lot of layoffs. And since then, we've continued to see a bit of a tumultuous time for students that are starting their career. And this is definitely reflected in these confidence levels. So you can see that while only 38% of candidates in spring 2022 said they are not confident they'll find a job that meets their standards. That number, went as high as 57% not confident in spring 2023 to now about 52% of candidates say they are not confident they'll find a job or internship that meets their standards. We also took a look at this between women and men to see, of course, if there's any variance in Gen Z women versus men feeling confident. And we do see that Gen Z women are a little bit less confident about their job search prospects, about finding the right internship or job, with 54% of women compared to 51% of Gen Z men. Now, we were curious, why are candidates lacking confidence today? Is it, all to do with the market? Is it that they don't feel confident in the skills that they're acquiring in their college classes? And what's really interesting about this data is that we see, of course, that, the economic landscape is contributing to this lack of confidence, but the number one contributor to this lack of confidence is candidates feel like they're submitting application after application and they're just not hearing back. So the number one selected thing here is I rarely hear back after submitting applications. So candidates are feeling like the system that's out there right now of just, sending those applications into the void, and we'll look a bit about application volume in a couple slides, but saying that's the number one contributor, followed by the current economic landscape, and feel that they're competing against too many other qualified applicants. Notably, we don't see that candidates feel they're lacking the necessary experience or qualification. So only a quarter of students say that they're lacking those necessary experience or qualifications, or that they don't think they'll find a role that meets their compensation standards. And only 11% say that they're actually unsure about what they're looking for in a job or internship. I also want to point out, it's not reflected here in the slides, but I did analyze this between men and women to see, is there a difference? Are women feeling like a lot more like they lack the necessary experience or qualifications? And there wasn't a notable difference in the stats. The number one reasons, regardless of you look at it versus men or women, is the rarely hearing back after submitting applications or the economic landscape surrounding it. What's interesting is that when we look at why candidates are confident in the landscape, we see that they're actually confident due to their education, adaptability, and in-demand skills. So the candidates that said, yes, I'm feeling confident, when we asked them why, they said they have that strong educational professional background. They're confident in their ability to adapt to different job requirements. They possess in-demand skills or qualifications. Less, attributing to this confidence is actually the field is growing and they think it offers good career prospects. Their field has opportunities, that they have good network and connections in the industry, or that they think it's a numbers game. So notably, this attribution to confidence or a lack of confidence comes down to candidates actually feeling like they are confident and that they would be a good fit for these roles. Candidates that are confident think that's why they would get a job. And the candidates that aren't confident, they actually don't think it's a result of their skills. They do think it's a result of the reflection of the market, or for some reason their skills aren't being properly reflected in the resumes or the applications, which is a really interesting distinction here. So some key takeaways, as we saw, half of today's candidates are lacking confidence. The reason is those market conditions, recruiter ghosting. Candidates think if they don't hear back, it's ghosting. And for candidates that are confident, that educational background is really fueling confidence, which a big takeaway here for me is that candidates, especially those who aren't feeling good about their prospects, are frustrated that they're not hearing back. A way to approach tackling that confidence issue wouldn't necessarily be saying, hey, you need to acquire way more skills in order to be a fit for this job market. Maybe that's the case, but a reason that candidates, are viewing themselves as not feeling confident is their application for some reason isn't getting, a call back. So they might need to adjust their resume. They might need to do more positioning of their skills to actually better put them in the right foot to actually get noticed for that application. So if you're considering what kind of skills workshops or things that you can do to help build up that candidate confidence, something to think about is how you can help those candidates actually position the skills that they have to be more attractive to employers, rather than saying, hey, you don't have the right skills or you don't have enough skills, because candidates right now are not necessarily attributing that as the reason that they aren't getting these calls back. I'm just going to take a quick look at the Q&A to see if there's any questions for this section. Okay, there's a couple questions about the data, so I'll just clarify that real quick as we go to the next session. I know we probably had a couple latecomers. This data is 3,000 candidates. We source these candidates from folks on the RippleMatch platform, so candidates that are using the RippleMatch platform, but they come all from nationwide, so universities across the country, which is what our applicant pool, our users are made up of. So it's pretty distributed across the board. We didn't look at it between first-gen, low-income, or historically marginalized groups. We have in the past looked at that, and we find that the split of confidence tends to be more gender-based, actually, rather than demographic-based, race or ethnicity-wise. And then the last question is, how does candidate confidence relate to STEM versus non-STEM? I also did break that down, and we didn't see anything notably different. So we did see that it still is a breakdown about like 50-ish% are not confident versus 50% are confident. And we have a couple more stats later on that we broke down. Anytime there was a slightly significant difference, I tried to include the STEM versus non-STEM, but if it's not in here, there's just not really a notable difference necessarily. And then there's one question is about, could recruiter ghosting be the result of poorly formatted resumes and failure in applicant parts to match skills, experience, and job requirements? I definitely think that that could be a big contributor. I think there's a big problem with candidates actually finding the right roles and applying to them. It's actually something that RippleMatch, what we aim to solve is that matching problem. And so candidates on our platform are only shown opportunities that they actually are a good fit for, that they're actually matched for, and likely to hear back from employers for. Because right now, most candidates, as they're going through job boards, they're just kind of sending things out, and it's really a numbers game, and it's not actually great for employers or candidates. So I'm just gonna get rid of these questions for now. But definitely, if you have questions about each section, if you want to submit those here, and I'll try to take a look at the end of each section just so we can have relevant questions associated with sections. Okay, so moving on to this next section, which actually builds a lot on some of these questions about, candidates submitting volume, all of the application behavior here. So this is a really interesting thing that we know candidates are lacking confidence. We know they're having a hard time in the job search. And this is really reflected in actually the volume of applications we're seeing them submit. So we ask candidates, how many applications do you predict you will submit or have submitted at the completion of your job or internship search this year? And of course, this is like across the board. It's not, on RippleMatch. It's, job boards, anything that they're using. And what we see is that 61% of candidates say that they're planning to submit at least 100 applications in their job search. We see about a quarter say that they plan to submit more than 300 applications. So we're really seeing that candidates, in order to compete in this landscape, feel they need to submit a lot of applications in order to land the right role. And it's at this point, the status quo is really, how can I submit a lot of applications because I'm not likely to hear back? What's really interesting is we also ask candidates in in an ideal world, what would you consider to be a good and realistic number of applications to offers that you would want to submit? And we see, 59% of candidates believe they need to submit at least 50 applications to receive one offer. And that's with the question framing of a good and realistic application to offer rate. And the reason we said good and realistic is because we wanted to get a sense of, you know, where are candidates at if things were going their way? How many applications do they think they would need to submit to get an offer? And 50 applications for one offer, you can start to understand why a candidate would be submitting 100 applications, 150 applications, because you want to have more than one job offer, ideally, when you're assessing where you want to start your career. So for the baseline to be, 50 applications to get one offer, it makes a lot of sense why candidates would really be just submitting so many applications to try to get where they want to be at. Notably, there's this question of, okay, well, how are students submitting all these applications? Is it because of AI? Are they, signing up for a tool that just mass submits applications? So we did ask this question, and what we see is that while nearly 50% are using AI to assist with resumes and cover letters, only about 12% actually report using an AI tool to submit applications on their behalf. So we're not seeing a huge adoption of AI to mass submit applications. The reality is candidates are actually going through and submitting these applications en masse, all on their own. So we're seeing the usage of AI really boil down to ChatGPT or similar generative text AI assist with writing the resumes or cover letters. So what's helpful to know about this data is candidates are definitely using that to craft their application materials, so it can be useful within your own team to understand what is your stance on that. I imagine you wouldn't just outlaw AI entirely, because it can definitely be useful for candidates to, really understand their thoughts, get things on paper for their resume, but it can be helpful to understand, where is our stance on students using AI for cover letters, and just, where do you stand as an organization? And for career services, understanding what is the way that you want to instruct candidates to use this technology in a way that's actually beneficial and, doesn't come across like they're using an AI and they're not looking it over. So I think knowing that 50% of students, and I'm sure this number is only going to grow, are using it to use these application materials, I think it's really helpful for career services and employers to understand what they want to really take the stance of how best to educate candidates of how it maybe should be used in the job search. So I think it's definitely good to understand just how to instruct candidates to, do the right prompts, to actually read over what it is they submit before they're going ahead and uploading it, because AI can be great in a lot of ways, but if you don't read it over, it can be very clear it was written by an AI. So, and I see a couple folks are saying that they definitely want to help leverage those skills to the critical thinking skills, and I think that's a really great point. And probably the way that folks are going to be approaching this from now on. Shifting gears over a bit to recruitment events, we did ask candidates, what do you prefer more, virtual in-person recruitment events? And what we see is there's not one preference necessarily. 40% of candidates say they don't have a preference for one over the other. 36 prefer in-person, 24% prefer virtual. We went ahead and asked, why do you prefer one over the other if you did have that preference? What we see is, not surprisingly, virtual events are seen as significantly more convenient than in-person events. So 80% say that they're more convenient for the schedule, easier to make time for. Not as much saying it's necessarily better at helping land a role, but it definitely is easier to hop on an info session that's virtual, or if that company is not visiting your school, instead of, only being limited to the companies that are maybe signing up for your career fair. For in-person events, we see that candidates view them as better at helping them land a role. I think this is also a result of a lot of employers, if they're going to a career fair or they're doing on-campus interviews, it does feel easier to make that link between attending the event and getting the job. So definitely candidates are viewing this as, a little more effective at helping them land a role, helpful for learning more information about the company and the role. So we aren't seeing, a lot of candidates not knowing where to find virtual recruitment events. So it definitely kind of boils down to that intent of the event and what the candidate views that they're going to get out of it. So if you're considering how to make virtual events, even more attractive to candidates, I think there's a ton of good things about virtual events and make them, a staple in any recruiting strategy. But as much as you can connect it to how it can help them land a role, the better, because candidates are really going into this not necessarily understanding how it will link them to that full-time role at the end of the day. So just to recap this section, and I'll check the questions as well to see if there's any questions I should address from this section. But Gen Z definitely solidified the mass apply era. We're seeing that the ease of technology combined with that shaky confidence is really leading us to this new era of mass applying. Even a quarter of candidates submitting more than 300 applications. We're seeing in-person events are being seen as a bit more effective than virtual events. When it comes to landing a role, virtual events are more convenient. So important to understand how you can connect the importance of those events and how it contributes to their place in the pipeline if you're going to be hosting virtual events. And then 50% of candidates are using AI in their job search, but not to submit applications en masse, really more to help shape their resumes or assist with their cover letters. And take a quick look at the questions here to see if there's any before we move on to the next section. So we have a question about, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on quantity versus quality of student applications. When they're firing off hundreds of applications without putting in the effort or networking, they're more likely to be ghosted. Applying more purposely is likely to get students more responses. I definitely agree with that. I think this is kind of the conundrum that we're facing right now in general, is that I think candidates are concerned about putting in that effort to do an application that's thoughtful, that is finding the right location, because they're used to the status quo of submitting something and not hearing back. So it's kind of a vicious cycle right now where candidates are like, well, I don't want to spend the time to find the right role and then never hear back. So it almost feels more productive to fire off 50 applications and maybe hear back from one or two. And I think that's, again, something that RippleMatch, what our aim is when students sign up for RippleMatch, they input all of this information that can actually help surface those opportunities that they're, if they apply to that match that's recommended for them, they have a 50% chance of actually landing an interview, which is so much higher than if they're just sourcing job boards for things that seem, interesting or potentially relevant. And so that's the matching problem that we're solving, because I think at the end of the day, it is hard to go through, the list of job listings on, Handshake or LinkedIn or any, another kind of mainstream job board and think like, okay, this is a good fit for me. Those jobs are obviously listed, they're easy to find, they're available, but to make that judgment call of this is the right fit for me, my skill set, all of these different things that I have, it's definitely a interesting component there. So I think that's kind of the conundrum right now. A couple more questions. The slides and recordings, I believe Nace will be sharing that. So I'll just say, and then was event defined? I was thinking about employer info sessions versus career fairs. We didn't define it in this particular question, but in surveys in the past, we found that students do tend to associate in person with like career fairs or info sessions on campus, and oftentimes virtual is the virtual career fairs or virtual info sessions. A couple other questions about this section. Measuring confidence as a key metric, that was from the previous slides. How do you gauge how realistic these students' confidence in their own abilities really is? So I think that question is really asking about how realistic is a student's confidence that they're saying, oh, I'm not hearing back, that's why I'm not confident, versus only 25% saying, I'm not confident because I lack the skills. I think there's a very good chance that a lot of these students that aren't hearing back are maybe missing certain skill sets, or they're not necessarily at the level that they think they are. But I think the distinction is it's really hard to build up confidence or even build up skills gap if candidates don't necessarily think that's what they're missing. And so I think when you understand that the reason candidates are lacking confidence is because of maybe the messaging issue, then you could sit down with them and say, like, let's look at the skills and the experiences you do have, how we can format that into a resume. And then it becomes more of a messaging thing and kind of looking at what they have, instead of just right out the gate saying, well, I don't think you have the skills needed to be employable, because I think then that leads to students maybe kind of shutting down or not necessarily be open to hearing and connecting, and which I think is a really reasonable response. If you're just starting out your career, it is harder to kind of swallow that maybe you're not like having the right skills, or you have certain areas to grow. But I think if you can look at it from well, let's take a look at maybe why you're not hearing back. Like, let's look at what is on your resume that could be, changed or positioned differently. So I think the reality is that's what candidates are viewing their own confidence is, but it maybe not as necessarily realistic for the world, but this is just a kind of advice on how to approach that and maybe get better results from some of these workshops. And then one final question just about international students. There is some candidates that are international students, but it is a small share. And I analyzed this in a previous survey, and we do see that a challenge is not hearing back, but most of the students here, a large share were not international students in this particular survey grouping. Cool. I'm going to move on to the next section now, but definitely appreciate all of the comments, and I appreciate all of the conversation in the chat. So definitely keep talking amongst yourselves. I think it is really useful to have these conversations sparked by the data. Cool. So moving on to the next section, candidate experience and renegs. So getting into this topic of ghosting candidates not hearing back, we asked students after submitting application, how fast do you think a company should get back to you about your application status? And this is pretty consistent when we've surveyed at different intervals. This is around where it lands, that the majority of students, candidates, think a company should get back to them within 5 to 7 business days or less. 66% say that would be that ideal response time, which definitely can feel intimidating if you're receiving thousands of applications to actually sort through those, get back to candidates quickly. And in a previous survey, we also found the number one thing that contributes to a negative candidate experience is not hearing back at all after submitting an application. So candidates definitely are sensitive to not hearing anything back. We also asked, how long do you think the hiring process should take overall? And about 79% of candidates think the entire process should take 1 month or less, which, if you're not able to get back to a candidate in 2 weeks, potentially, a month is going to be pretty challenging to complete the hiring process. So we find that candidates today definitely have high expectations for a quick feedback loop. And I want to share just a little bit of context as to why that is. So Gen Z candidates, if you think of the environment that they've grown up in, it's so easy to go online, place an order, you know exactly where you stand in that process. So if you go online, you click order, you're going to get an email instantly that says your order is confirmed. Here is where it is in the process. So that happens also with food delivery apps. So nearly every kind of action that Gen Z candidates are used to submitting online, which applications take place online, are usually followed by, really tight feedback loops and expectation setting and understanding where they are in the process. And so if you think of the job search experience, you're, giving your information, you're filling out all of these things, you're asking them for this job, and then to not have any indicator of kind of where you are in the process, I think that's where candidates get frustrated and don't necessarily understand why the process is this way when so many other things that they're doing online are followed by a tight feedback loop. So to submit an application and then 2 weeks later hear, oh, you're not a fit for our role, best of luck on your search, or even 2 weeks later, oh, we'd like to move forward with you. Can we set up a call? It's kind of a cognitive dissonance between what they're actually used to in their environment in general. So that's some context that I like to share to kind of conceptualize, why our candidates today, they're submitting all of these applications that are also impersonal. How are they expecting to have, a tight feedback loop and a response back? And I do think it's because of the nature of all these applications. Feels like an online transaction, but it doesn't follow the patterns that they're necessarily used to when they're completing many of these other online actions. Just any final notes on that, definitely feel free to continue talking and I'll answer any questions in the Q&A box if you want to submit about any more questions about response time. But going to shift gears into, once they do end up moving through the process and about renegs, I know this is something that comes up a lot with employers, which can be frustrating, and also career services, how best to navigate renegs. We've been asking this question again since spring 2022, which is if a better job or internship came along after you accepted one, would you rescind your original offer acceptance for a new role? And what we're seeing here is consistently candidates say, yes, I would rescind that original offer acceptance for a new role. This doesn't mean that 70% of candidates are rescinding their offer, but it does mean that there's a willingness to continue to look around potentially or entertain other offers and even rescind that offer if a better one, and we'll go over what better means on the next slide, comes along. And this has remained pretty consistent. I wasn't sure when we started asking this question in spring 2022 with, the economy being so strong, so many offers, if this number was going to stay this high or drop even lower to like 50%. But we've seen it stay pretty consistent with the spring having a little bit lower than the fall. Typically, of course, students at the fall are very at the start of their search. They might accept an offer in the fall and say like, yeah, if it, over the course of the year, maybe I would rescind it. But it's staying in that 70% range, which means that there's a large share of candidates that are willing to rescind that offer in the future if another one came along. So in terms of why that is, something interesting that we've seen is the top two reasons really consistently have been long-term career goals and compensation. So we asked them, for those that said, yes, I would rescind an offer, what would be the reasons? And what we see here is it's stayed pretty consistent that, a higher salary or higher pay in the new position is stayed pretty consistently the top, along with a new position better aligning with long-term career goals. Notably, we have seen a bit of a shift in the last year that more candidates are saying they would rescind that offer if it better aligns with their long-term career goals, slightly eclipsing the higher pay component. My theory there is that as pay has kind of cooled a little bit, a lot of those bidding wars, especially for like tech talent, has cooled a bit. There's maybe not as much of an emphasis just to switch for different pay, but as we'll see in the section that we're focusing on retention, which is next, candidates are really concerned with their career growth, their professional development, how they can invest in their future, and how a company is going to contribute to that. So they really do want to feel that the company that they're going to start their career in can really help with that long-term career goal. So to recap this section, and I'll take a look at the Q&A to see if there's any questions to address here. Gen Z expects a tight feedback loop during the hiring process. Of course, as we talked about, around 70% of candidates are comfortable reneging on an offer if another one came along, and this has stayed consistent over time. And then long-term career goals and compensation are really fueling those renege decisions. I'll take a look at the Q&A and see if there's anything to go over in this one. Let's see, a couple here. One question, does RippleMatch have a function to help companies close the feedback loop timeline? Yeah, that's a great question. We do, a core part of what RippleMatch does is actually help employers quickly sort through all of these, inbound applicants or matches they might have. So we have our matching technology that of course helps you actually source candidates, helps opt in interested candidates into your process, but companies also have the option to turn on automated inbound applicant review. And so what that does is it applies the same matching algorithm to these inbound applicants and allows it to quickly sort and show you, these are the top 10% of candidates that are qualified based on your job description and your algorithm. So that way you can actually go through that and say like, yes, I'd like to move these forward. And of course, those other candidates are not qualified are not immediately rejected. They're just in a different bucket. So you can actually go through those or even say like, oh, okay, all of these candidates aren't qualified because they lack, sponsorship, for example. And you can actually send a mass notification email that says like, sorry, like you aren't able to move forward in our process. Best of luck. So we do have that ability to actually sort the huge volume of inbound applications you might get. And the median review time that we see on our platform is about 5 to 6 days. So the sort of middle of the road RippleMatch user is going through in 5 days to get back to candidates. So definitely a really helpful thing to actually close that feedback loop and be in line with what Gen Z candidates are hoping to see. Okay, let's move on to the next section, which is all about retention. So trends among retaining Gen Z candidates, attracting them to your organization. So first, let's talk about, where we're at with hybrid versus in-person versus remote work. There's another question we've been asking consistently to kind of compare and contrast over time. We've seen that, unsurprisingly, hybrid work is the most popular. I imagine for a lot of us on the call, hybrid work is also popular. It's great to have kind of the best of both worlds. We kind of broke this down actually in the question to see if candidates prefer hybrid based on personal preference or hybrid based on company distinction. Notably, this has seen a journey over the years with originally most candidates prefer based on personal preference. We saw a return to actually hybrid based on company distinction for the past couple of years, which I imagine is a result of interns going to their internship and being very unclear when to actually come into the office, needing more structure. But now we're kind of returning to that preference for just coming in when they want to. That said, I think to be attractive to Gen Z candidates, you can't really go wrong with hybrid in general. It's very much a clear preference. We do see a preference for fully in-person work, and fully remote work is the least preferred work setting. So candidates were asked to select one of these definitively. So again, it doesn't mean they would count out things that are fully remote, but in a perfect role, candidates would prefer to be in a hybrid setting where they have that flexibility, but they do have that ability to come in and connect with their coworkers in person. In terms of career development, so as we saw, candidates are really caring about their career progression. We'll see that in the coming slides as well. So we asked candidates, how long do you expect to stay in an entry-level role before receiving a promotion? And this to me is a really interesting stat that shifted over the course of time. So as you can see here, in spring 2022, when the economy again was really great, candidates had several offers to choose from. I imagine when they were going through the recruiting process that recruiters were saying potentially like, oh, yes, we have amazing career progression to our company. Maybe after a year, you can expect to see growth in the company. So probably a lot of conversation in the recruitment process around career growth, promotion paths. So 75% of candidates in spring 2022 thought that it would be really only a year that they would have to stay in an entry-level position before receiving a promotion. A year later, 40% believes that that's kind of where they would be for entry-level role, about a year. And now in spring 2024, 32% say that about a year they would stay in an entry-level role before receiving a promotion. And the majority, 61%, expect a promotion between a year and a half to 2 years at a company. So this is definitely a reflection, I think, of how the economy has cooled for a lot of demand and just conversations. There's been more of a, I guess, reality check on how fast one can actually expect to progress at an organization. So we do see that candidates have tempered their expectations a bit about how they actually would grow at a company, and only about a third actually expect they'd receive a promotion after a year at an organization. So definitely interesting to see that. And sorry if you hear a background buzzer, someone is trying to get a package. So just ignore that buzzing, it will stop soon. Moving on to more about what candidates hope to get from an internship, and this is also in line with this career progression, wanting to make sure an organization's long-term career pathing aligns with what they're looking for. We ask candidates, what do you hope to get out of a summer internship? Rank what's most important. And what we see here is that the number one thing candidates are hoping to get out of an internship is a return offer for a full-time role. Which is, definitely encouraging to see that candidates, they're interning because they want to return to your organization. They're not actually just interning to have a line on their resume. The second most selected thing was experience working on real-world projects, followed by new or more developed hard skills. As you can see here, it's a little less important to have an expanded professional network of peers, new or more developed soft skills, or exposure to a new city. We also looked at this between STEM and non-STEM, especially to see, is there any variation actually in candidates that are aligned with majors that aren't STEM majors in terms of hard skills? And what we see is it's actually exactly the same for the top three. So candidates really, regardless of they have academic, regardless of their academic major, they really want to get a return offer for that full-time role. They want experience working on real-world projects. They want to get more developed hard skills. Definitely seeing that there's some variance, of course. Non-STEM majors, some of them want to have maybe a reliable income for the summer, but the top three are really pretty similar here. One thing I want to point out about this that's interesting is new or more developed soft skills is obviously not as popular with candidates as they're going into an internship. But I think that's actually an opportunity for folks who are hosting internship programs to really make sure they also emphasize the importance of gaining those soft skills. I think as a lot of college students have kind of gone through remote learning or maybe done remote internships, probably placing a premium on those skills that can be put on a resume that are really quantifiable and tangible. But I think it's a big opportunity to talk about why it is important to be able to foster relationships, to have really effective communication, to be able to show up professionally at work, all of those things that it's difficult to put that on a resume and have that be selected from the hundreds of applications, but it's really important for actually progressing in career. So I do think as you think about your internship programming, yes, definitely figure out how you can speak to this desire for a return offer, give experience working on real world projects, help them develop those hard skills, but also talk about why it is important in this day and age to actually work on those soft skills and grow those over time. This is a data point that was not collected in our survey of students, but I wanted to bring this in because it's from a different survey that RippleMatch ran in November. This was part of our Campus Forward Award application process. So we collected the estimated intern return rate from the leading 200 university recruitment programs. So this is a different data set, but I wanted to bring it in to actually give a benchmarking of what top programs are seeing their median intern return rate be. So we see that across a sample size of 200 UR programs, split between 50 small programs, 50 mid-size, 50 large, and 50 enterprise size, so more than 400 interns and full-time hires, 64%. So we're seeing of the interns that are brought in for a summer, 64% are coming back the following year for a full-time role. This number, of course, changes depending on the size of the program. We're a small program, so that's 90 or less interns and full-time hires. They had a median return rate about 45%. And the largest program sizes, so again, more than 400 interns and full-time hires, saw a median intern return rate of 70%. So this is just a helpful benchmarking to understand what are some of the top performing programs doing, which again, we're evaluated those based on a number of factors, but this is what we're seeing in terms of those return rates. Shifting gears toward retention, recruitment data, we also ask candidates, which of the following factors are most important to you to accept a full-time job offer or would influence you? So we asked this question of both juniors and seniors, and we said, even if you're just looking for an internship right now, think to when you would accept a full-time offer. And we see this pretty in line with what we see with the reneg rates. So we see that competitive compensation and benefits and role aligning with long-term career interest is most important for candidates to feel comfortable and excited to actually accept a role with that company. So those are two things that really play a big role in a candidate wanting to start their career with that company, is understanding how that actually aligns with their long-term interests. It can present a challenge, obviously, if a candidate thinks they know what they want to do, but maybe that's going to change or shift over time. And I think that's why it's really important as you're designing those interview processes to understand what a candidate is hoping to get out of their long-term career path to make sure that is aligning with what you can actually offer as a company. We also took a look at this data between men and women to see if there's any variations. And we do see that Gen Z women are more likely to care about certain things than Gen Z men, including company culture. So we see 70% of women say that a company culture they feel excited about is important to accept a full-time role versus 59% of men. Stability is a bit more important. See a couple other variances, such as women do care more about a company's commitment to diversity and inclusion, as well as social impact initiatives. So this is pretty consistent with data that we've seen over time. Gen Z women do tend to have a more holistic approach to what they're looking for in a company compared to Gen Z men. But we do see, of course, that compensation and benefits and role aligning with long-term career interest is pretty consistent between women and men, and there's not really any large variances there. And this is moving on to the share of women prioritizing mental health and well-being compared to Gen Z men. This is a question that we've added because we know Gen Z is very sensitive to mental health. We know that this is a generation that's destigmatizing a lot of conversations around mental health. So we included this question to see, what kind of benefits, health and wellness do Gen Z candidates care about when considering a internship or full-time job? So we asked the question, how important is it to you that a company cares about your mental health and well-being? And we see that about 61% of our respondents say it's very important for them to feel they can be successful at work. And women care a bit more about that, with 67% of women versus 57% of men. Only around 5%, 4% of folks say it's not at all important for them to feel that they can be successful at work. So we are seeing that today's generation, they do want companies to be invested in supporting their mental health and well-being during that internship or full-time job. In terms of specific healthcare and wellness benefits, we see that ones that are associated with financial benefits definitely do top the list. So affordable healthcare coverage, a stipend for wellness activity, generous parental leave. Looking at it between men and women, this is consistent, but Gen Z women care more about those health-related benefits than men. So 83% say affordable healthcare coverage is really important when considering that full-time offer, generous parental leave as well. So we do see that there is a lot of importance on these benefits. That said, on the next slide, what I want to share is we ask the question, what actually matters more? A higher dollar amount, minimal health and wellness benefits, or a lower dollar amount, robust health and wellness benefits? And the reason we ask this is because oftentimes companies say, well, we have amazing benefits at our company, but we can't pay as high. How can we position ourselves as competitive candidates? And as you can see here, the majority of respondents would prefer that higher dollar amount over minimal health and wellness benefits. Women are a little more likely to say that they're okay with that lower dollar amount versus those robust health and wellness benefits. But as you can see, there's definitely this prioritization of compensation, cash-related benefits over just more benefits. And so I do think wherever possible to tie those benefits to a dollar amount can help it be more competitive, because I think it's difficult for candidates in what is truly an expensive time to be starting your career between housing costs, inflation. I think candidates are definitely considering, well, how can I maximize my cash flow when everything is so expensive, from student loans to everything that it requires to start your career. So candidates are definitely very compensation minded, and I think they might appreciate these health and wellness benefits, but I think if there's a way to tie that to the dollar amount and how it can help offset, even certain cost of living things, is really beneficial to help that feel competitive. And then I just want to comment further on this trend of, why is Gen Z so focused on compensation and money? And this is something that has really switched in this post-COVID world. So we've been asking this question of, when evaluating an offer, what influences you most to accept it, since even before COVID. And what we saw is before the onset of COVID-19, the class of 2019 then actually ranked compensation and benefits as the lowest thing. And of course, the economy was really strong before the pandemic, very competitive space for entry-level candidates. They got a lot of offers, but we did see that once COVID happened, career advancement and compensation and benefits took the top spots, and candidates saw a world of economic instability, of rising costs of living, so much things that they really want to prioritize cash flow and how can they advance in their careers, which likely would, of course, lead to more money. So this is definitely something we've seen shift with COVID-19 playing a role in how candidates are existing in the landscape as they're assessing opportunities. I think candidates really care about just financial, not just stability, but how can they afford to, as they get out into the world, pay for their expenses, pay for their student loans, pay for the highest cost of living that we've seen, highest rates of inflation. So candidates are really sensitive and money-minded to, how can they make sure they're setting themselves up for financial and career success. This is definitely a shift from the pandemic time. On that note, to recap this section, and then I'll review some questions since we're about to kind of move into our final part, which is the general Q&A. But to recap this, candidates really do prioritize career growth in their roles. They want to see a promotion within 1 to 2 years. They really care about growth, professional development. They also highly value compensation over other factors. So again, as they're even looking at that overall benefits package, they want to see things that are more compensation related. And then we do see that Gen Z women are taking a more holistic approach to why they would accept a role with a company, from culture, stability, approach to D&I compared to Gen Z men. So some final takeaways here, and then I'll move into the general Q&A and also share the QR code for you to download this full report, which is different than just the slides. It's the full report that contextualizes all of this. Gen Z solidified the mass apply era. We're seeing a ton of applications being submitted. 50% of candidates are using AI in their job search. So AI is definitely taking a central role, but not to fuel the mass applications, really to help with those cover letters, resumes, and of course, Gen Z candidates expect a tight feedback loop during your hiring process, which can definitely be challenging to achieve given all of the volume of applications and how candidates are approaching their job search. So on that note, I want to promote the Q&A now. So you can scan these codes to actually access the guide, so all the data that I just went over. And then we're actually hosting a panel of Gen Z interns that are going to be talking about what they want to see from a successful internship program. I will share these links in the chat as well. But these two things, you can download all of the data. And you can also, that was supposed to be an emoji, but that didn't show up. But yeah, and I'll take a look at the questions now. And again, if you're signing off, would love to connect on LinkedIn as we share more information, but I'll take a look at some of the questions here. Okay, and feel free to continue submitting your questions and I will take a look. All right, so how much of these student frustrations regarding the feedback loop timeframe is simply a part of the real world? Is the issue more of an education process for what students should expect? Even as an established career professional, the feedback loop can be very slow for job applications. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, whenever something is challenging, it's always a question of, what is reality versus like, what are students or even job seekers in general in their right of like hoping that it can be better. I think a part of this is, I think career services professionals are, they can definitely connect with students and explain some of the reasons why companies might be slow in getting back to them and help temper the expectations of it's important to start your job search early because it can take a long time for companies to get back to you. That said, I think there are companies that can get back to students quicker. And I know we work with a number of companies that really prioritize getting back to students quicker to be competitive for that talent. So I do think it's kind of a difficult question of, I think it is important to, educate students that don't necessarily count a company out if they don't get back to you for 2 weeks, but also companies should be aware that if you're not able to get back to a candidate within 2 weeks, another company might be able to get back to a candidate within a week or, 7 or 8 days, and that candidate might just work with that company and just try to move forward in that process because they are hoping to get a quicker feedback loop. So I think it's a real world thing on both sides is candidates should be prepared that they might have to wait, but then employers should also be prepared that they might miss out on certain talent or certain candidates if they're not able to increase that response time to get back to the qualified candidates. Let's see, a couple other questions. A couple questions about the slide deck. Nace, I believe, will send out the slide deck, so definitely look out for that. And then you can also download it by scanning this QR code. So another question here we have about, just recapping the selection criteria for survey participants and question about the leading career program. So survey size, 300 candidates, 3,000, my bad. 3,000 candidates that we surveyed, and they were representative of organizations, universities across the country, as well as academic backgrounds. We selected them by emailing our user base, which is representative of all of those different components, and then they opted in to take the survey. And then on the note about the leading career programs that we shared that sample size of internship benchmarking, that was through our Campus Forward Awards, which is an award for the top university recruitment programs. And so that was a very robust application where they share things like the size of their program last year versus this year to show growth, continued investment, all the things that they do to recruit students, to recruit diverse candidates, to invest in candidate experience, to invest in internship. And through that criteria, we selected the top 200 programs that were essentially the best in their field from those applications. So that's what that sample size was. Let's see, a couple more questions. Are internships beneficial for experience and career opportunities for students, even if their degree does not require it? From what the employers that we work with, I think internships are hugely beneficial for candidates to get experience in. I know that a lot of the employers that we work with, they're really looking for previous internship experience, if they're hiring a full-time student. And I think even candidates that are sophomores are oftentimes getting internships now. So I do think that for interns, it can be beneficial to gain experience with companies that maybe do have a lower full-time conversion rate if they're in their sophomore year. So if you're a sophomore looking for an internship and you're thinking, of course, this company isn't going to hire me because I still have 2 years of school left, but it can be a really beneficial exchange of work where they can get some real world experience. That company can get more work with interns, but they're not necessarily expectation of converting to full-time. I do think that students who are juniors, a really advantageous thing to do is to look for those companies that do have this demonstrated investment in converting interns to full-time positions, because that's how a lot of companies are building their pipelines, is they're really hiring interns who will be graduating the following year, and they're really using that internship as a way to assess, would this candidate be a good fit for our full-time positions? I'm gonna check the chat if there's any more questions here. Okay, any additional questions? The following questions are more about, here's one question. We have a new ATS. They're using LinkedIn, Handshake, Simplicity, and Heavily Recruit in Person. With a tool like RippleMatch, what does streamlining recruiting processes look like? I think a big thing that RippleMatch does is actually take all of those massive inbound applications that you might have and apply a really intelligent matching algorithm to that. So if you have a lot of candidates that you're getting through in-person recruiting, LinkedIn, Handshake, it can be difficult, if that's in your ATS, you have to go through those manually. Maybe you have like some rudimentary filtering, but to truly actually sort through maybe 1,000 candidates to pick the maybe 50 that you want to focus on and reach out for interviews. And so RippleMatch would take that really high volume of applications, and we would have that be integrated into our system, and then apply that matching filter and algorithm to that role essentially. And then you would see, your top 5% of candidates or top 10% of candidates. And because our algorithms are really designed for early career recruitment, it's a lot more possible to actually apply, that ability to see your most qualified applicants through that. So definitely, if you're curious on how we can help with that streamlining of that process, if you have a really high volume of applicants coming from a lot of different sources, definitely recommend requesting a demo, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to put you in touch with our team. Any other questions? I think most of these questions are kind of just around one question just came in, lots of data about student confidence, expectations. Would be interesting to see how that relates to fatigue / exhaustion. Thoughts on that? I think that's a good question. And I think the reason for candidates not feeling confident being they rarely hear back from applications, they feel they're competing against too many qualified applicants, and the state of the economy is like really challenging. I think that definitely aligns with candidates feeling really fatigued about the process, and that they don't really know a good way out, because the reason for the lack of confidence, it puts the control outside of them essentially. They're not saying, I feel like I lack confidence because I don't have enough skills, which is something that you can actually do something about that. You can take classes, you can, learn from folks. But when the challenge is, I never hear back from applications, the economy is bad, there's too many qualified applicants, I think it definitely reflects this fatigue and almost feeling of helplessness that, it's a really difficult time, but there's not a clear way out or how to actually address it. So I think that definitely aligns with some fatigue that we're seeing with students and candidates, and just figuring out how can we help put the power back into their hands and figure out what ways can career services or employers that are hosting professional development workshops actually address that and help candidates really feel like they have the power in their hands again. Okay, let's see. A question just following up of helping you surface the most qualified applicants. Do you mean the resume match with the JD with keywords? There's a number of more complex data sets that go into the algorithm. So it's not just the filtering of the resumes with the keywords. It's more information that our team would be able to walk through the different components of the data set. But it's not just the job description with keywords. Essentially, the employers that leverage our platform fill out more robust role requirements, the types of candidates they're looking for in terms of like location preferences or things that are, like essential to the job. So such as, requiring sponsorship, if they have like a GPA requirement, certain things that might not be on the resume, but that candidates are able to put in their further applications. Any other questions here? I know we're just about to be at time. So I think on that note, I will hand it back to the NACE team to close it out. I'll stop sharing my screen, but thank you so much, everyone. This was so great and so engaging.
Thanks, Kate. That was fantastic. We had some great feedback in the chat. Just to let everyone know, yes, the recording, the slide deck, and the chat will be available in your MyNace account as early as tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.